Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Clarion, for having us here today. And again, thank you for the sponsors of this session, SoftQuiz and Coinapod. My name is Willem van Oort. We are consultants for the online gaming industry, and we constantly are on the lookout for new technology, games, whatever, doing better business for our clients. Bitcoin is a phenomenon that dominated the press in especially the second half of 2013. I was lucky enough to have met Jon Matonis in early 2013, when my first interest in Bitcoin started. We met at the Gaming in Holland conference in Amsterdam, where he spoke side by side to the leading iGaming payment providers. That was an interesting session, I found. The press has taken over Bitcoin since. Wall Street Journal announced today a dedicated section to Bitcoin, and in our industry, Vera and Jon are now the first Malta-based operator accepting Bitcoin. Apart from the impressive technological innovation that Bitcoin brought to the world, I find the speed, personally, and the cost aspect the most relevant for the iGaming industry. Jon Matonis is e-money researcher, regular contributor to Forbes, and executive director of the Bitcoin Foundation. The Bitcoin Foundation is a research and educational foundation founded in September 2012 with a stated mission to standardize, protect, and promote the use of Bitcoin cryptographic money for the benefit of users worldwide.
This is a project called SETI, which is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. What does this have in common with Bitcoin? Why is this in a Bitcoin presentation? Well, the reason is that about a year and a half ago, this distributed computing project used to be the largest computing project in the world in terms of distributed computing power and processing power on the global network. These were dormant computer cycles, mostly at universities and research organizations, where they would search for radio signals from around the world by using their dormant computer cycles and banding together. Now, about a year and a half ago, the Bitcoin project surpassed SETI as the largest distributed computing project in the world. So if you go online and you look up distributed computing projects, it will rank all the various ones that are out there. There's over 200, 300. And Bitcoin now is the single largest one by a long shot in terms of the consolidated computing power. This is what they've done so far in terms of mapping the different area of the universe for checking for radio signals. So they're very coordinated in how they change this. Now, it's interesting that Bitcoin surpassed this project so quickly. I think that one of the reasons is because people found that there was the incentive for doing the Bitcoin computational work. They were actually getting rewarded for it, so the incentives were correct. And it's ultimately more important to secure a decentralized financial system than it is to look for aliens. This is a map, a graph of the Bitcoin network computational power. It's only a year that we're showing on this screen here, approximately a year. This is phenomenal growth for the hashing power on the network. And it's going to be interesting to see if this is sustainable. But essentially on the left, those are terahashes per second. And the consolidated horsepower of the Bitcoin network is what provides the security and the strength for the overall transaction network. We expect to see this grow from here. It used to just be the ordinary CPUs that could mine Bitcoin. Now we've evolved past CPUs to GPUs into ASICs, which are application-specific integrated circuits that are used for mining Bitcoin. So all of this from around the world is contributing to the overall security and strength of the Bitcoin network. So why are we seeing Bitcoin now? What's unique about its evolution in terms of why it came out now? Well, Bitcoin is 5 years old. In January 3rd of 2009, Bitcoin was released into the wild by Satoshi Nakamoto. So it's a little over 5 years old. And the growth since then has been extraordinary. Bitcoin is a reaction to diminishing financial privacy, which we've seen in many places, predominantly in the US and the EU, but it's increasing. Centralized monetary authority and a dominant legacy infrastructure. All of these things combine together to give this dramatic underpinning for Bitcoin explosion. But Bitcoin was not alone when it first came out. There were precursors to Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin technology that was developed, its main benefit at the time of release was the fact that it was decentralized, and the distributed trust ledger is what allowed it to really differentiate itself from previous attempts at digital cash and eCash. In 1997, we had hash cash. In 1998, there was B-money, and 2001 to 2005 was Nick Szabo created the concept of BitGold. Bitcoin borrowed heavily from these early technologies. So in effect, the Bitcoin protocol and the algorithms and the cryptographic primitives behind Bitcoin were around for a long time. They were stress tested, they were peer reviewed by the community. It's not something that just popped onto the scene without extraordinary research and peer review. So in a way, it's an evolution. And the other important thing about Bitcoin as an evolution is that it actually needed to be decentralized to be survivable. The previous attempts at digital cash that we all know about, which is DigiCash from David Chaum in the Netherlands, was centralized digital cash. So it was cryptocurrency, but it was still centralized in the sense that you had to go back to an issuing mint to validate the coin and to protect against double spending. eGold was another system that was really catching fire in the 2005 to 2006 time zone. eGold was not cryptographic currency, it was ledger-based for transferring gold, but it still had the problem of being centralized. So when these systems were centralized, they created a single point of failure. And Bitcoin addresses that by being decentralized, and ultimately it has survivability. So when people say to you, well, how long is Bitcoin going to survive? Ultimately it has the most survivability because it doesn't have a single point of failure. All right, I want to steer it a little bit towards the customer service challenges today in iGaming. I talked to a lot of people from the gaming profession. Real-time payments in both directions is one of the things that's a challenge. It's what customers are asking for. Payment solutions that cover all countries. How can we get into certain countries? Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal currently block over 60 countries in various parts of the world. So that's cutting off a massive customer base for you. Minimal fees for funds transfer. The gaming business, the iGaming business is very transaction driven. So the fees that you're paying for payments are going to have a massive impact on your bottom line. If you can control that, you can gain a competitive advantage over the other operators. Maintain client privacy beyond gaming environment. Well, the reason I say beyond gaming environment is for legal Bitcoin casinos, or for legal casinos, you're mostly going to have the customer identity. So the customer at least has to trust the gaming operator. But in using Bitcoin, they don't have to worry about trusting the payment processor. They don't have to worry about anything showing up on their credit card bill or on their bank statement. So I talk a lot about using payments as a competitive wedge. And you're going to see this touched on a lot today, but the reason is that Bitcoin is the ideal digital casino chip. And once you understand Bitcoin and how it operates, it's pretty obvious that when you're using Bitcoin online, it's very similar to using a casino chip in a land-based casino, because you have the immediacy, you have the irreversibility, and you have the privacy. Those are all three factors that you expect in a gaming environment. And you get that today in land-based casinos, but for some reason, we're not seeing it make the full jump to the electronic world for casinos. And Bitcoin also has the ideal virtual currency attributes. And for those of you that have studied virtual currencies, such as Linden dollar and other types of virtual currencies, you'll see that these three features, you'll have to go through your checklist of seeing which you're going to use for an ideal virtual currency. I maintain that an ideal virtual currency will have a non-political unit of account. So in other words, it won't be pegged to a dollar or a euro or a yen or a pound. Bitcoin has that. Two-way convertibility. You have to be able to buy and sell. You can't be going into a one-way a roach motel, like with Zynga Poker, where you win, your money goes in but never comes back out. And an independent floating exchange rate. It has to be a market-based exchange rate for the currency unit, so that it's it's pretty much emulating currency in the real FX market. So all of those things combine together to make the ideal virtual currency. Now, using payments as a competitive wedge. This has been my mantra for about 3 years plus. I expect it to happen soon, but where I live and the people I talk to in the mainstream gaming environment, they don't see the reason to change. They don't see the reason to be the first mover in this, because they're already dealing with a lot of regulatory oversight, especially on the money laundering. So why throw in Bitcoin when you're already dealing with so much already, just to maintain your operations? And if you're number 1, number 2, number 3 in your space, you don't really have a reason to change, because you're not yet seeing the customer demand. So the established brands see no reason to change. What you're going to see, though, with Bitcoin is you're going to see the smaller firms driving the innovation, because they're the ones that have the incentive to gain market share. They're the ones that have the incentive to satisfy customer demand in a new area and actually do something that the larger casinos aren't willing to do. If you use the payments as a competitive wedge, rather than what the game is, the theory is that you should be able to take your global market share from competitors over time. You can provide the superior gaming experience, and you're shaking up the market in a way that the larger casinos won't do. And this is exactly what we're seeing happening today. We're seeing the smaller gaming operators, not the ones that were Bitcoin only, but the ones that were smaller operators using a variety of payment systems. So they were already taking many different payment options and payment methods, but now they're integrating Bitcoin into it, and they're taking it to the next level. So we've evolved to the stage 2 of Bitcoin disruption within disruption. And I say that because you're introducing a new monetary unit. So when you go to payments conferences around the world, they're always talking about, well, how can we disrupt payments? Well, we're going to switch everything to mobile. That will disrupt things. The reality is that all that does is reshuffle things. They're still using the dollar and the euro in the mobile payment environment. The real way to disrupt the payment system is to introduce a new unit of account. So in effect, a new monetary unit, a non-political unit of account. And the reason that that's so disruptive is that you don't have to go by all of the legacy rules that came before. You don't have to adhere to the transfer mechanisms that were deployed for the dollar or for the euro. You can bypass that. You're using a decentralized distributed trust ledger, so you don't have an intermediary. And the rules around that become quite different. And in effect, they become very disruptive. Now, there's 2 things to point out with Bitcoin when you're looking at it. There's essentially 2 parts of Bitcoin, because there's a capital B, which refers to the larger Bitcoin distributed network. And then when you have Bitcoin with a small b, you're really referring to the monetary unit of account that runs on the network. So it's important to look at both of them together. You can't really compare Bitcoin to PayPal, because PayPal is really providing infrastructure and railroad tracks, for the existing monetary units. They're transferring governmental monetary units. Bitcoin is providing both what PayPal does as the infrastructure, but also it's providing the monetary unit account that runs on that same infrastructure. So if you really wanted to do an adequate comparison, you'd have to look at PayPal coming out with their own monetary unit. Okay, I'm going to go over the Bitcoin benefits for iGaming operators. I mentioned the 60+ countries. So depending on how you're regulated or what countries you're trying to go into, you can extend acceptance into a large number of countries. You provide a payment method for the unbanked. So if people don't have a bank account, all they need for Bitcoin is a mobile telephone. They don't need a bank account. You have no disallowed merchant category codes, which is a major change from the past, especially with the card associations, where they're constantly blocking certain category codes, and it's difficult to keep up for which ones they're blocking per country. You're not subject to payments embargo. You eliminate the chargeback and fraud risk. With Bitcoin being irreversible, it's essentially a digital bearer instrument. So when I give it to you, you have it. I no longer have it. You don't run into the problem of subsequent chargebacks, which can dramatically reduce processing costs in the payments environment. And you have processing fees approaching zero. They don't get to absolute zero because there's always fees on the Bitcoin network, transaction fees. And what you will see though is you will see fees that are a tenth or a 20th or even more of what you see with traditional payment methods. So that's a major competitor for the existing payment methods is Bitcoin fees approaching zero. And you have near immediacy of settlement. So you don't have to wait 2 days, 3 days for a bank wire. You don't have to wait 5 to 7 days on the merchant side to be credited for a batch settlement. You have immediacy of settlement in both directions. So as the operator, you're receiving immediate funds, and then as the player, you're also receiving immediate funds, given a certain number of confirmations on the Bitcoin blockchain. Okay, so what we're really doing here is we're entering a post-legal tender age. Because if you can have a currency that competes with central bank issuance, you don't have to rely on legal tender for validity. You can go to market-based legitimacy. You have an alternative now. And the post-legal tender age will be so disruptive, and it will end up altering political institutions. It will outsurvive certain political institutions, especially the ones that overprint. Because it survives those political institutions, it's going to have a monetary policy impact and a fiscal policy impact. So let me look at those for a second here. On the monetary policy impact, fractional reserve banking becomes nearly impossible without the emergence of money substitutes. Opportunistic and unrestrained inflation gives way to natural deflation. So with Bitcoin, what you're experiencing is you're experiencing a move to zeros, but to the opposite side of the decimal point. Interest rates will respond more to the risk of the lending activity rather than central bank open market operations. And ultimately, you'll see a reduction in the detrimental business cycles because you won't have the central bank manipulating the interest rates. How does it change fiscal policy? Well, I maintain that governments will gradually have to shift away from taxing income to taxing consumption. And the reason is because in the Bitcoin cryptocurrency future, it won't be so clear for governments and taxation authorities to understand and ascertain individual income. That doesn't mean that taxing is going away. It just means that the type of taxation is going to change. Registration of exchanges and merchants facilitate higher consumption taxes. It's easier to see when you're online with large merchants like Amazon and eBay that you could actually charge a tax at the point of consumption to make up for any lost revenue that you have on the income side. And government spending becomes constrained by the actual revenue raised, which means that unpopular expenditures become very difficult to fund. So if a government, from the fiscal policy side, actually has to adhere to spending money that it raises through direct taxation, it fundamentally alters what they're spending money on and how much money they're spending, because they can't just go to the central bank and print it. So these are radical changes for political institutions, and it's a post-legal tender age. So I raise this to show you the implications of Bitcoin as a non-political monetary unit. The way it transforms retail payments is that you no longer, obviously, you don't need an intermediary anymore. This is a wallet app on your mobile phone. So everybody's trying to be first in mobile payments, do this, do that with mobile payments, and they always run into the trifecta of interests, which is the government interests and the banking interests that are all trying, and then you have the mobile operators that are all trying to get a piece of the pie. With Bitcoin, you don't need to involve those constituencies to have a mobile payments platform. You're just going direct from one user to another user. So you cut out all those constituencies that were trying to get a piece of the pie in the mobile payments platform. You also don't need those silly dongles that were, attached to the phone, like for Square or for the blue triangle on PayPal. Okay, this is the Bitcoin transaction network. It's showing Bitcoin right now. This was taken probably about 2 months ago when Bitcoin surpassed Western Union in overall network volume. It's fallen back a little bit since then. But there was a point briefly where in daily volume, Bitcoin was actually above PayPal for a few days on this graph. Okay, so if you don't believe me, here's some quotes from others. Bill Gates says that Bitcoin is a technical tour de force. Al Gore says, I think the fact that within the Bitcoin universe an algorithm replaces the function of the government is actually pretty cool. Well, out of all the things Al Gore said, that's probably the only thing I agree with. And then Nassim said, Bitcoin is the beginning of something great, a currency without a government, something necessary and imperative. And I can't leave you without sharing my quote with you, which is, Bitcoin is to legal tender as BitTorrents are to copyrights.